Well, here we are. My name's Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next. It's the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with James, guitarist, vocalist, frontperson for Birmingham post-punk three-piece Mutes, who have just put out their fourth album, Buried Where You Stand, on No Sound Records. Although, as James revealed to me, No Sound Records is basically just a name given to the self-released nature of the album, but it is available on all streaming services and also available on Bandcamp. And as we discussed in the interview, you can buy the record, you can buy the album, I should say, on CD, and it comes with this cool, basically booklet, which is a scan of the handwritten notes of James's lyrics, which I think is pretty cool. You will notice if you go onto Bandcamp. The names of the other members of the band are Craig Bainton on drums and Thomas Hewson on bass, but it's just James on vocals. And this singular name is partly like a doff of the cap to 1980s indie rock band Felt and their frontman, who just went by the name of Lawrence. So yeah, James is James. So anyway, we talk about the latest album, which I'm quite a fan of, and it was kind of a fun exercise for me as a bit of a music geek who likes to sort of try and find the reference points of what bands were influenced by. Because listening to Buried Where You Stand, and actually the songwriting of James in general in Mutes, it seemed to me, and this kind of validated in the interview, that there are a variety of different influences, nothing that sort of takes over the music, but it's kind of interesting little reference points. So like I heard things like Sonic Youth and Hüsker Do, and yeah, there were a few other names that James brings up in the interview that hadn't occurred to me, but they made a lot of sense after he said it. So for anyone not familiar with the band, one of the features of the band, of the latest record, that really appealed to me is that you can kind of think of the band as sort of operating in this sort of indie rock sphere, although they don't really kind of fit quite naturally to that tag. But what they do have is they have these kind of dual elements of certain amount of dissonance in the music, but then also kind of like a pop sensibility that really comes through in James's singing and in his vocal melodies. And those are all elements that we talk about. We do talk about, different influences. We talk a bit about James's background. The band has been going, as James puts it, like as the band proper since about 2019, but he actually started the project as a kind of solo project back in 2013. So he's put a lot of time and energy into this band. And so we can kind of think of it as being, largely as a creative expression of James. So anyway, as is my wont on this podcast, I'm always interested to sort of explore the personal experiences of people operating in an independent and DIY world. And so it was also good to get James's insights about playing live shows, about how to book shows, kind of costs involved in that, costs involved in making a record as well. These were all valuable insights from him to get his perspective. So if you want to follow Mutes, you can find them on Instagram, where they are Mutes, Mutes, Mutes. And they're also on Facebook. And I believe they may just be Mutes on Facebook. Yes, they are Mutes on Facebook. You can follow them on both. They don't currently have any live shows coming up, but yeah, those are the places to go to get any updates on that. As James talks about in the interview, they are actually just poised to start making their next album, so that'll be something to look forward to as well. And I think that that's about all that I need to say, other than you can find me on all social media at Tom Osman Sounds. You can go to tomosmansounds.com if you want to check out what I'm doing musically. And other than that, yeah, wherever you are listening to or watching this interview, whether it's YouTube or Substack or Spotify or Apple Music, I would be very grateful if you would do the engagement type things: thumbs up, 5-star ratings, comments, etc., feed the algorithm, etc. And I'm going to play a song from Buried Where You Stand at the end of the interview with a little snippet from before we start talking, well, basically in about 10 seconds. And now there is nothing else for me to say, but take it away, James of Mutes. Aha. Oh, now I see you. James, Tom, nice to meet you.
I see you, Tom. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Yeah, I suppose, all things considered, you know.
Are you in Birmingham right now?
I certainly am. Yep.
And are you a Brummie born and bred?
No, not really. As you can probably tell by my accent or lack thereof. No, I'm a military brat, so moved around a bit, but kind of grew up kind of in sort of Wiltshire, which is, down south. So you in where are you based?
I'm not a military brat, but I'm also of ambiguous national identity. I'm in Glasgow now, where I used to live, but I only just recently moved back.
Oh, okay. Where did you take some time away from Glasgow in?
So originally I'm from Australia,
Mm-hmm.
and my family moved back and forth between the UK and Australia for a while, and then I studied here, and then after that, I was kind of still on this existential journey to find out where I can find home. So I was like,
Yeah.
England, Wales, Czech Republic, Germany. And then finally, after 17 years, I went, you know what? I think it's Glasgow.
Yeah. What is it about Glasgow that captured your heart?
A lot of my friends live here, and
Yeah.
I like the mentality of the people here. I don't know how much experience you have with Glasgow, but it's like there's a lot of kind of piss taking, but in a very sort of
Yeah.
loving way, and I
Yeah.
like
No,
that.
I've spent a fair bit of time there. Played there quite a lot in the past. Spent some very blurry evenings in a nice and sleazy's.
Oh
Um,
yeah, nice and sleazy, it's iconic.
yeah. So I do know Glasgow. It's always a. I remember once I played there in a band I used to be in, and it all got a bit messy after the gig. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, we'd all agreed to reconvene at the hotel, and myself and the singer of the band are there. And like, oh, where's the drummer? We get a phone call. I'm like, where are you? He's like, I'm at the Travel Lodge. Like, you're bloody not. And it turns out he was on the Travel Lodge on the other side of the city. So that was always fun. I also once locked myself in a hotel corridor whilst completely naked in the middle of the night in Glasgow once. So that was another. But when in Glasgow, do as the Glaswegians do, I suppose. So
Exactly. And you can also say, because you don't live there, you can say what happens in Glasgow stays in Glasgow.
Yeah, yeah. It probably would have if I wasn't intent on telling everyone about the mad times we had in Glasgow, But
That's the thing, these things make a good story, and then unfortunately it means people know about it.
exactly. That's the problem, isn't it? That's the dilemma.
Exactly. So before we get on to talking about Mutes and talking about your latest album, which is your fourth or fifth?
It is.
Buried
Yeah,
Where You Stand.
It's the fourth album, but there's quite a few EPs as well. But yes, it's the fourth full-length album.
And this is out on No Sound Records?
That's non-existent. It would just self-release. Do you know what I mean? It's just something to type in that little box when you upload it to your distributor. So
fair. Yeah, I was looking at your previous albums on Discogs, and I was looking at the codes, and I was thinking, oh, is this also self-released as well, the previous albums?
Yeah, so it's the previous three albums were all released through our bass players label, a label called Fomar. But again, it's sort of running fast and loose with the term label. It's just a collection of friends who kind of it's just another outlet in terms of social media to post about the album. Do you know what I mean? The only time I've ever been on a label with Mutes that involved a contract was the first ever self-titled solo EP, and that was a small label based in Oxford. They did the first and second EPs. So yeah, we've kind of eluded the interest of labels really so far. But it is what it is. I'm not anti-label,
Yeah.
but it's one of those.
So I do want to get back to talking about your military brat history, because I think that's very interesting. But I'd like to talk a bit about the album first.
Mm-hmm.
So I read the press release, and you mentioned someone in the press release relating to the album, which is really relevant for me because this podcast kind of exists as an extension of a book idea I have where I want to kind of build up a picture of independent DIY music making.
Yeah.
And originally, there was going to be this thread running through the book of my personal quest to go to Chicago and record with Steve Albini.
And go to electrical audio, yeah.
And unfortunately, Steve Albini
no longer with us.
Is no longer with us.
Definitely didn't have that on my bingo card for this year, that's for sure. Yeah.
No, absolutely. But as you brought him up, and I think the quote from you was something along the lines of the latest album being your Steve Albini record, kind of relating to the production. So maybe you could say a bit about, how you sort of see the sound of this record compared to the past, and how you feel about Steve Albini in general. Like, what does he mean to you?
Yeah, well, in terms of the album sonically and, in the context of our other records, I think as a lot of these things are when you're a band with limited time and limited budgets, we had already decided that we wanted to do it live, with all of us in the same room, and all the bass takes are live. We literally had one day to track, and then one day for second guitar and some slight extra percussion. So like 80% of the instrumentals are literally just Tom, Craig, and I in the room playing through the song. And some of the takes that made the record are actually the first take as well. So, but even if time hadn't dictated that we had to do that, we did want to do it live anyway. And that's the reasoning behind that, I suppose, is because previous records, I mean, I've had lots of ex-members. There's kind of like maybe between 8 and 10 ex-Mutes members. I kind of refer to us as like the fall of Birmingham in many ways.
I was going to bring up the fall at a certain point, and you've been going for 11 years, is that right? You formed in 2013.
Yeah, I released the first EP in 2013, and then the first kind of full band iteration of the group came about around 2015. So yeah, it's existed for 11 years in name only in many ways. Do you know what I mean? But it is kind of my project in essence, and that's not to discredit any of the other members. Yeah. But it does almost feel like with the lineup we've got now, Craig, Tom, and I, who've been together since 2019, it does feel like a new band. So in some ways, I consider this band as it stands now to have only existed for 5 years. But there's all the preceding sort of years. But no, with the other albums, they were kind of done quite piecemeal, really. I mean, the first album, No Desire, I think our guitarist, the second guitarist at the time, actually quit the week before we went into the studio, but he agreed to do the album anyway. So that was kind of made under duress in that sense. And then the second album, I actually didn't have a band. Our drummer at the time, Junior, or the second album, I recorded it all and mixed it all myself and did everything except drums. So it was quite kind of fractured in that sense. I just taught Junior the songs, and he's an absolute machine. He plays in a band called Johnny Foreigner, who you may have heard of. They're kind of like an indie pop band, but he's an incredible drummer. So I just, and again, tying into Steve Albini thing, I suppose Steve Albini is one of those engineers that makes you feel like if there's a will, there's a way, So with the second album, I just decided the only way it was going to get done was if I recorded it myself. So, I won a court case against an old employer and used some of the money from that to buy some recording equipment. And just incidentally,
out of curiosity, that second album, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that
Pareidolia.
Pareidolia.
Yeah, pareidolia. Yeah.
What does that mean?
So that's basically the kind of phenomenon of it's like when you see an object and recognize like human features, like a human face, so like you might see a plug socket on a wall that you think looks like a face. You know what I mean? And I think it was just meant to be a kind of maybe pretentious commentary on how like the human condition means that we need to sort of we're so afraid of the alien that we need to force we project ourselves onto everything we see, even in inanimate objects.
In what, like out of desperation for familiarity?
Exactly, precisely that. Yeah. So, and that record, I'm very proud of. That's probably the record, in many ways, that I kind of feel closest to, because it was such a labor of love, and I think stylistically, it's probably our most eclectic. Even if some of the ideas maybe didn't come out the way that they could, maybe not as much finesse as they could have had, but I kind of felt like I really learned to I gained some confidence, I suppose, undertaking that task and having it, the end product being something I feel I can still stand behind. It was kind of validating, I suppose.
And that was the first record that you worked with Mark Gittins, is that right?
No, yes, sorry, yes, it is, yes, because he mastered that. And yeah, Mark's a good friend of ours. He has a studio called Megatone in Digbeth. And I've known Mark for years. I initially met him as just a live sound engineer. I think he made a complimentary remark about one of my guitar amplifiers, and I was like, "Oh, we're going to be friends now then," because we're both gearheads. So, and yeah, we just worked with him since, because he's a very, again, sort of Albini-esque in the sense that he's an engineer, he's not a producer. And it's really good for me, especially, to be able to work with someone who can just help me get what I want. I already generally know what I'm searching for. Not that he never has any creative input, he does. But when you are, when you don't have any time or money, as we've never had. And as I said, like the two albums that we recorded with him, Dreams of Being Cornered, and this latest one, Buried Where You Stand, they were both done in 2 days. So to have someone that you're comfortable enough to go into a studio with and not feel like one day isn't enough time to get down to 12 songs, that's a pretty rare thing. So it speaks volumes to his abilities and how he can put you at ease and just help you to get on with stuff,
And so with the previous album, I think you said, having been made within a similar period of time. So how did you sort of get from there to the latest album being kind of different sonically?
Well, Dreams of Being Cornered is far shorter than Buried Where You Stand. I think there's only about 9 songs on there. But we were actually incredibly lucky in that we went into the studio to record that. I think it was 2 weeks before lockdown happened. So I actually did then have oodles of time to do overdubs and vocals and stuff myself at home. So although we tracked the basic tracks in 2 days, I did a lot of kind of keyboards and did all my vocals and some guitar overdubs and stuff at home. So it wasn't done quite as, there's a lot more going on due to tracking outside the studio, whereas with Buried Where You Stand, I did do some keyboards outside the studio, and I always do my vocals by myself as well, because there's so many vocal harmonies and stuff like that. So I'm quite I'm quite a perfectionist when it comes to tracking. I don't like comping. I don't like there to be much editing going on. I like to generally have stuff all as one take, which can take forever.
I think it's a way better principle. Like, I fell into that trap in the past with different projects where we'd go, oh, we have the capacity to break, let's find like the perfect take. And it was actually, I remember there was an interview with Steve Albini, which I saw, where he kind of gave a sort of good sort of account of why that doesn't really work a lot of the time, because you end up with something that sounds very artificial.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah,
kind of disjointed. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a time and a place for it. Do you know what I mean? It all depends what end product you want to go for. It's because there are some things that need to be meticulously crafted and need to be perfect in terms of, time or tone or pitch or whatever. But obviously for I mean, like on Buried Where You Stand, for example, what's the song called? Is it punky song on there? De-Wired. Like that song, like the guitar is out of tune, and like we I think we'd only played through that song together as a band like maybe 3 times before recording it, and that was the only take we did. And we kind of we weren't going to record that song because I thought it was just a bit. It's just often on our records is at least one sort of throwaway kind of fun song, like on Dreams Being Recorded, it's Sainted, and on Buried Where You Stand, it's De-Wired. But then once we kind of finished recording it, and like there's an organ solo I did in there that was literally again just one take. I'm like, I'm just going to make some horrible kind of Yola Tango, John Cale-esque kind of like noise. But then and like the vocals on that song again, one take, lyrics practically made up on the spot, and it's kind of like there's no meticulous crafting going into that song whatsoever. But then the album comes out, and I've got a few people telling me that's their favorite song on the album, which obviously your initial response is like, that one, really? But it just goes to show that maybe it's that sort of unhinged energy across as a result of it not being too labored over, and that's what people can latch onto. So and some of my favorite records are like White Heat, like that is just such a absolute clusterfuck of noise half the time. Like Sister Ray is just there's a story about the engineer having to leave the studio because they were like 30 minutes into jamming Sister Ray and just couldn't take it anymore. So having those kind of harsh sounds. Like the first Women album as well has some songs in it that can't even really be called songs. They seem like kind of almost ambient recordings of a band making horrible noise. But it's a lot of this stuff is about creating an atmosphere, isn't it, I suppose, and trying to instill, kind of try to provoke some sort of emotional reaction, and whether that reaction be like claustrophobia, they can be less tangible reactions than just pleasure and displeasure.
100%, absolutely. Yeah, well, I think this is a really interesting insight of the Velvet Underground's being an influence, because a couple of things I was thinking listening to the latest album, and actually also I think this applies to just kind of like your songwriting in general from what I've heard. There is dissonance in there. So I can see the Velvet Underground connection. I would also say maybe there's like a bit of a Sonic Youth thing going on sometimes.
Yeah, massively. Yeah, I mean, all those bands, it's kind of, it might seem like it's a bit of an entry level into kind of post-punk sort of list, but all those bands, would be like The Birthday Party, Sonic Youth, Swell Maps, Velvet Underground, even other bands that have dissonance and groups that have dissonance, like like Merzbow, Boris, Women, as I've mentioned, newer sort of bands that use that stuff like Mets, even like Botch and Converge and stuff like kind of but then for example, if you look at the Velvet Underground, like this is a band that did Sister Ray and also did Pale Blue Eyes, and it's that kind of a dynamic range. I think with this band, because there's so many, I think when you're kind of just creating stuff, I never really tend to approach a project saying like, oh, right, these are the parameters that I'm going to work with it. Generally, an album tends to just be a collection of songs that's being built up over a period of time, and the way that I write anyway, I think when I was younger and I had a lot more time in my hands, I did just used to record a whole bunch of stuff, and there'd be a lot of it that wouldn't get used, But in the last sort of 5 years or so, since work responsibilities and all that stuff like that has taken over, I find now that generally there's less sort of cast-offs. Generally, the stuff that I write and that we record ends up being on an album, And
you're a bit more kind of like efficient in what you do.
Yeah, I think we just have to be, because we just have so little time. Like we were meant to be starting to record a new album this week, but there's personal responsibilities in the band that's stopping that from getting done as soon as I'd like. So I'm going to try and do maybe another EP in the meantime or something, I think. But yeah, it's yeah. So I'm sort of running away from the point, but I suppose my point being that, like, the knowing that that because those bands have such a large range of sounds and never seem constrained by any particular style or format.
Yep.
When I started this Mutes project, which I hate to call it that because it's not a project, it's my my life's work, really. But it was never a case of I'm going to start this kind of band. Do you know what I mean? Yep. It was just like, I'm going to make music, and this just happens to be the name that the music is coming out under.
Yeah.
So.
Well, going back to the Velvet Underground's comment and what you said about that kind of dichotomy between Sister Ray and Pale Blue Eyes, that does make a lot of sense to me, because the other thing that stands out to me on the latest record and from your songs in general, I think you have a really great ear for a vocal melody. And so I was thinking to myself, like, you've got like a real kind of pop sensibility in the sort of melodic hooks. And I was thinking, where does this come from? Because one of the things that kept popping into my head, which might be a case of the two of you having the same influence rather than an influence on you, is Dave Grohl.
Okay, interesting.
So, for example, there were a couple of tracks in particular on the latest album. So, Barely Living Proof and Another Moon Song. The vocal melodies remind me a little bit of the more kind of hushed Dave Grohl delivery. Like, I'm thinking of the first couple of albums, like Big Me or Walking After You.
Okay. I mean, my favorite Foo Fighters album is definitely There's Nothing Left to Lose. I know it's one of his sort of softer ones. And again, that was just him and Taylor Hawkins on that album. Those two on themselves. But
I didn't necessarily think that was a direct influence. So I'm wondering, like, if it's not, what is sort of the root of this melodic sensibility?
Well, I wouldn't say Foo Fighters are an influence. That's not because that's no slight against them. They're a classic band, and I've certainly played in bands that are directly influenced by them. But I do think Dave's kind of creative vision is an influence, in the sense that he is another man who never let a lack of a band stopping him from getting things done, But in terms of actual direct influence, I mean, on the vocals, I mean, one that kind of slips under the radar a bit, and I'm always happy when people pick up on it.
Before you say it, it's not Heat Miser, is it?
No, it's Alice in Chains.
They do have beautiful vocal melodies.
They do, and that's probably the subliminal, cause for why so many of our songs have basically multi-vocal harmonies all the way through. I mean, they were my favorite band when I was between the ages of like 13 and 17. So.
And do you do all of the vocal harmonies?
Yeah. I don't. Tom, our bass player, is actually a great singer, but he has his own band who are fantastic, who are called Hoopla Blue. He plays guitar and sings in that band and is their primary songwriter. And I think part of him coming on board with Mutes, I don't want to burden him with any more responsibilities. I wanted to keep it fun for him. I mean, when we play live, he doesn't do any backup vocals or anything either. It's just me, and I've got this fucking massive battleship of a pedal board and a vocal loop. It's just so much work. So like,
so you're actually doing the harmonies as loops when you're playing live?
Not that often. On some songs, like Televangelist, I will loop the first phrase of the chorus and then harmonize it with the second phrase. But basically live it's quite kind of primal and stripped down, really. I just tend to go heavy on the slap back on the vocal, and it's been one of the things actually that comes from having so many vocal harmonies on record and then translate to live, is it means I have to think a lot more about what harmony I'm going to sing as a solo vocalist to try and carry the song melodically. Do you know what I mean? Because I can't. It might just be a bit static if I only say sing the root harmony. So it forces me to be almost a bit more athletic with my vocal. But I'm actually a trained vocalist anyway. I did take singing lessons for several years, simply because when I wanted to start a band at university, couldn't find any singers, so I was like, oh fuck it, I'll just do it myself. So it's kind of it's one of the parts of making music that is definitely the most stressful. I mean, when we did this album, actually, one of the reasons that it took so long from recording to coming out is because I basically lost my voice for like 9 months. Whether that was a result of COVID or stress or just, bad living choices, I don't know. But yeah, it meant that it took me like 9 months to do the vocals for the album, which was, really stressed me out because, and there is still some songs where I feel like the quality of the vocal maybe isn't as good as it could be. But I kind of reached a point with it mentally where I was like, I don't think anyone is going to notice except me. So, just for the sake of getting it done, it got done. But yeah, vocals take forever because it's, generally another reason I like to take the music away and do the vocals myself is it's not only the doing all the harmonizing that takes so much time, but also rewriting lyrics and playing with vocal melodies, because it is the toughest part for me is definitely writing lyrics that are not shit and vocal melodies that aren't just blindingly obvious,
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I think you do a pretty good job on that, in my opinion.
Well, thank you.
But to that point about your feeling that certain vocal takes might not be as good, but people might not notice it. It might also end up being another thing like what you were saying with Dewired. It's like there's what you perceive as flaws, but maybe when someone listens to them, like they interpret that flaw as some kind of, like soulfulness or some grit or something like that.
Certainly. And I think that's true. I think like when I listen to, not that I go around listening to my own music, but for example, like we did some demos for Dreams Being Cornered, the third album. And I realized, because we put them out a few months ago as sort of a Bandcamp Friday thing. And when I was mastering them and listening to them, I was thinking to myself, God, my vocal sounds like really upfront and confident and fresh here. But I think because, to be honest with you, it's like I've always had this thought that because my voice is quite high pitched, because the vocals are quite kind of melodic, that maybe we have kind of straddled that sort of gray area between not being a pop band, but maybe because of the poppiness of the vocals in particular, not being like cold enough to be considered experimental post-punk. And I almost wonder if that middle ground that we occupy has been to our detriment. So I think with this album, I did make a conscious decision to make the vocals a bit more buried and a bit more kind of muted, because I didn't want them to come across so strident and kind of cocksure. I wanted it to be a bit more frail sounding in a way.
No, that kind of production choice did feel like something that you'd consciously done to me. Like it sort of made me think of kind of a shoegaze kind of style. Like there were these layers of vocals that were sort of sitting in the general ambience of the song rather than being pushed to the front.
No, that's exactly what I wanted it to do. And again, some would say to the record's detriment. I mean, there's been a couple of reviews that have said like the vocals are too low in the mix, which is absolutely fine. It's a subjective thing, isn't it? But one of my favorite bands is My Bloody Valentine. So vocals being too low in the mix doesn't particularly bother me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And also as well, it's like, you've got to make choices at all these different points. And so any of these choices can be something that a particular person says, oh, they should have done this or they should have done that.
Precisely,
you've got to take the path that you take.
With this album as well was that although we tracked it all live, each song, like Mark usually when he records a band in the manner that he did us, he'd record the entire session in one session on like Luna, which is a program that we've used to record the past couple of albums, and you'd mix the entire album as one, basically. You have the same drum sound going all the way through, blah 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 blah. But with this, I did tell him that I was going to put all the songs into their own sessions explicitly, so that we didn't just use the same jumping off point for every song. We mixed every song from scratch. So although they were all recorded in the same manner, I think that because of the choices made in the mixing process, they've all come out sounding quite different. So, going back to what you said about how you have to make all these different choices, per song, each song was it treated as its own, experience. So a song like Spiders, again, for example, like I wanted to try and do a sort of Phil Spector-esque kind of mix with that one. I don't think we were quite as successful as I wanted it to be honest, due to time constraints. But that's why it's got that kind of washed out sort of wall of sound. But I think there's reverb on the master bus on it. Whereas
I really like the progression on that, and it's I remember listening to that song and like feeling at the end of it, like, oh, it's kind of tugging on my heartstrings, but I don't know why. It's got something in there.
Yeah, it's an odd song that actually it's one of those songs that it's kind of genreless. I think it's kind of it's chimey, but it's not straight ahead indie rock. But then you've got a song like this first song, Transparency, which is just one vocal, pretty upfront, distorted, kind of garage rock sort of kind of style vocal,
or a little bit kind of Marky Smith as well.
I mean, it again, going back to the whole kind of like trying to pull away from the poppy stuff. I think I've done a bit more of a sort of monotonal delivery here and there on this album. And the Fall are probably, if not my favorite band of all time, then in the top 5. But his and not just because of him. Steve Hanley's bass playing is just absolutely incredible. And I got to see House of All play at our local venue the other month, and with the Hanley brothers and the Mark, whatever his name is, so Martin Brammer. It's kind of surreal seeing 3 of the kind of OG 4 guys up there. Sadly, they actually weren't very good, but that's different. That's entirely,
Now I want to go back, because we touched on your childhood as a military brat. So tell me, give me the story. Where did this take you?
Absolutely nowhere of note, to be honest with you. I was born in Norfolk, lived there till I was about 3, so I have no recollection of living in Kings Lynn. Then my father was posted to a tiny village called Lynham, which has a Wikipedia page smaller than most blurbs on books, because there's really nothing happening there. I was sent away to private school when I was younger, not because my parents are very rich or anything, but because it's like learning, difficulties and stuff. And there's the Air Force do, at least did, an arrangement whereby you get like 50% off tuition fees, but only if your child's a boarder. So I then started boarding, but initially would still go home every weekend because my parents were only 20 minutes down the road. But then I got posted again to Cottesmore, which is sort of East Midlands, kind of Leicestershire, and they were like 5 hours across the country then, so I didn't go home on weekends at all. And then they moved to Telford, where they still remain, and I started going to school in a place called Bromsgrove, which isn't too far from here. So although they did move around a lot, I was kind of stuck at school for pretty much 70 or 80% of the year, so which was an odd environment, because it's something that when I think about kind of blows my mind a bit. But obviously, if you're at boarding school, you don't have any of your own space. So like, when I first started playing guitar and stuff, there'd just be kids around like oh, shut up, you're rubbish, stop playing, blah blah blah. But I think when you're young, you can be quite single-minded about things, so it never put me off. But it was an odd environment because that kind of environment doesn't tend to foster creativity
Mm.
due to their lack of personal space, you know. But I think because I was kind of ill-equipped to deal socially anyway, despite the fact that there was lots of people around, you know, it didn't really matter to me because I was always had my head up my own arse anyway. So yeah, it was an odd environment when I think about it. You know, I don't think you get many people coming out of that environment who go on to be artistic because you don't have any time to develop your art
It's not
unless
really fostering that kind of development.
no. So yeah, whether I'm a bit of an outlier in that sense, I don't know. But yeah, it. So I'm both grateful for it and also not. I mean, my sister, who's 11 years younger than me, has grown up at home, and you know, as a day pupil, and she's, you know, she's a normal person, i.e., not creative in the slightest. So I'm kind of, if that is what I would have become, I'm grateful that I was sent away. You know.
So from all of that toing and froing, do you think that that's left you, and I'm sort of partly speaking from my own experience, has that left you with sort of an ambiguity about where home is, or do you have a sense of where home is?
I think I'm not a very sentimental person, really. I don't think. You know, I'm not trying to sort of over dramatize my own, you know, psyche or whatever. But I've never really been one to think about where I'm from and where I belong. You know, it's again going back to the sort of the being at school surrounded by people all the time, but still finding my own sort of niche. I think I tend to be kind of fairly in my head anyway, so I don't really pay too much attention to my surroundings, I suppose. But I mean, Birmingham is, you know, is where I've lived all my adult life, and you know, I've got a fantastic partner that I've spent many years with, and we may not remain in Birmingham, but I think Birmingham is where I call home. You know, despite all its shortcomings. I mean, I've been around enough, you know, toured enough and seen enough places to know that there's no utopia out there, you know, waiting for me. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It took me a while to come to that kind of conclusion, and I was slightly extreme in my way of going to live in a different place rather than just
Yeah.
visiting and spending a bit of time there.
Well, I think it's sometimes it's probably what you have to do, isn't it? I mean, I imagine
Mm.
you probably came back a better person for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very happy for having had the experience. Kind of blows my
Yeah.
mind sometimes where I think like, fuck, all the places I've lived since I last left.
Yeah. When
Crazy.
you're in the middle of it, it probably doesn't feel like such a mental thing to do. But when you look back at it and think, Jesus Christ, I really dropped everything and left there, you know. But
Exactly.
and it's, you know, that there's times. I mean, my original plan after university was to move to Leeds because there was a kind of a scene there at the time of bands like Eagles and Pulled Apart by Horses and Hookworms and stuff. There was a bit of a burgeoning post-punk sort of scene, and you know, the music that I'd started to write kind of loosely fit in with that aesthetic. And our original guitarist lived in Leeds, so the second EP, Starvation Age, was actually recorded in his basement in Leeds. So my original plan was to move up there and start the band with him, but you know, I met my partner and just never got around to it really. But I love Leeds. Leeds is one of the Leeds and Nottingham are places that if for any reason I didn't live in Birmingham anymore, they're both in places that I've considered moving to at some point in my life. I think they're great places.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And going back into your lyrics, so you mentioned a little bit about kind of being in your own head a lot of the time, and I saw again in the press release you talk about your lyrical concerns generally being sort of internal and being quite existential. Which, as soon as I see the word existential, I'm like, oh, that piques my interest because I feel like I'm very existential. But you know, if you think about the latest album, maybe just thinking about your songwriting in general, I would imagine you probably have a sense for yourself when you think about what you write. You can probably see kind of recurring themes that are coming again and again. So, what are kind of like your main lyrical concerns that you keep coming back to?
I think, you know, I mean, general existentialism. Um, I think there's kind of the human condition, I suppose, observations pertaining to that. Obviously, a healthy dose of self-loathing, drug and alcohol issues, just kind of generally things that, someone who is fairly ill-equipped deals with, I suppose. I'm kind of never. I mean, I find lyric writing extremely difficult because, I. This is going to sound like a very pretentious thing to say, but I have an English degree, and I appreciate people who can write well. Therefore, I feel it would be, a sin if I was to not do right by them. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm very critical of lyrics and my lyrics in general, and it's, as you said, like obviously there are recurring themes and there will continue to be, but I'm also conscious of not just mining the same hole, indefinitely.
Yeah.
Sort of what's the word? But losing impact over, there's a better way to put that, losing impact over time, you know what I mean? Sorry, tired. But yeah, so nothing out of the ordinary. But I think what I was trying to get at with that quote, I suppose, is that obviously, it's very appropriate that we should be having this interview tonight on All Nights, because the political landscape of the UK has become a very, in my opinion, I kind of think these bands that write songs that are essentially just like, fuck the Tories, and like that's the chorus, that's it. It's just for me, it's very low hanging fruit,
Pandering.
And, pandering, and even if like the message is like, yeah, you're right, but it's not. It doesn't take much deep thought, does it? It's not particularly cerebral, and I kind of think
it doesn't tell you something that you couldn't have already figured out yourself.
Exactly, yeah, and a lot of it is just preaching to the choir as well, especially in this sort of kind of music scene. So, and I generally don't feel that music like that ages particularly well, because what are they going to sing around? What are they going to sing about in 2 days' time when we no longer have a Tory government? But yeah, and I'm not trying to come across as I don't know, pretentious or anything, but I just feel like generally that the more respected writers in with the most longevity and stuff, usually there's a bit more kind of internal kind of insight going on. And also it's also like even not so much of a conscious choice. You write, and I write lyrics. I don't generally sit down to write a song. I will continuously write lyrics, and then when it comes time to actually record vocals to a song, or start singing a song, if we're doing it live before recording, then usually it just kind of starts off with whatever line I've got fits the vocal melody I've got in mind, or if a melody and a lyric comes at once, and that'll be the jumping off point. There's quite a lot of editing in the process that goes into what becomes the final sort of lyric in a song. And I've definitely written some bloody shit lyrics in my time, and sometimes it's not to the detriment of the song if a lyric isn't so good, because as we were kind of talking about before, with each song having its own kind of part to play.
Yeah,
there are some songs that don't need a lyric that is as labored over, and some songs can have more throwaway lyrics. Sometimes it serves the general mood of the song, but it is something that I think about a lot, especially with this new album that hopefully we'll start working on soon. It's kind of a bit daunting thinking like, well, what do I feel like I want to say this time round, and how do I want to express it, but that said, there are some more societal themes on the latest album. I mean, Mia Slaughter is open to interpretation, but it was written around the time of sort of lockdown, so there is definitely some sort of Tory bashing going on there, but it's a bit more ambiguous, and obviously, like songs like Televangelist are, religion is definitely a focus, continues to be, probably be more so, because religion is mostly in a conflict, isn't it? It's man kind of failing to align himself with the finality of life, so
yeah. Now, on the topic of Televangelist, I noticed that like if you go onto Spotify, there you can see that as a single, and the cover art for it looks to me like a nod to the Jesus Lizard. Is it?
It is. Yep. It's I thought it's it was just, I just thought it was funny. I did it in about 5 minutes on Photoshop, and I was like, it was like, only the real ones will get this, And I was extremely disappointed because I was there all proud of it, and I put the screenshot of it in the band chat, and fucking they don't even know the Jesus Lizard is. I was like, you what? So yeah, I found that a bit disappointing, but yeah, I mean, Brand New rips it off with the cover of their Jesus single, so I was like, well, it can be done. And obviously the guy on the cover art is a famous disgraced televangelist, so there's layers to that onion, in that cheeky MS Paint cover art. But yeah, I just thought it'd be funny, and I guess I was also like maybe secretly hoping that some sort of, because you're literally the first person to actually mention that. Like, none of the coverage that the single got on any blogs even said like cover art that's reminiscent of Goat, So I guess I kind of maybe hoped that like someone would see it and be like, oh, I like the Jesus Lizard, I'll check that out, And also the other side of the joke being that song sounds nothing like the Jesus Lizard. So,
but I also, in general, what I think is a very positive indicator for your band is that I do hear these different reference points, or I think I hear these reference points. Like I think I hear a bit of The Fall, or I think I hear a bit of Hüsker Do, or a bit of Sonic Youth, but none of these things are ever kind of overburdening where I go like, oh, this is them doing this. It's just I sort of hear these snippets of that, which I think is nice. It sort of tends to suggest that it's like an organic kind of absorption of different elements.
Yeah, it is. I mean, like some of the comparisons that we've had are just ridiculous. Like, we've literally had, like, in the last 12 months alone, we've had, Manic Street Preachers, makes total sense. Mastodon, what the hell are you on about? Queens of the Stone Age, don't really understand that either.
Queens of the Stone Age thing, I'll just say, I think in the vocal melodies, it's the kind of Dave Grohl thing.
That actually has been mentioned before, and any comparisons to the Ginger Elvis, I will gladly take. We've had we've had a bunch that make me think, oh, I mean, not that I'm discrediting them, obviously that's what brings people to mind, but then it just means when we do get a band that I maybe would want to be more closely aligned with a band like Deer Hunter, it's just like, oh, thank God. Like the Sonic Youth one, for example, like they are probably one of my biggest influences, especially in terms of guitar. But it isn't a comparison that we get that often. I think because maybe we're more kind of classic in our sort of strong song structures and stuff. But it is organic. I mean, but we've all got, to be fair, very different influences in the band. Anyway, between us, I mean, Tom he's very much into bands like, he loves the Smiths, he loves Grizzly Bear, he loves a lot of kind of hip hop and stuff as well. And so his bass lines are often quite sort of bouncy, and Craig, our drummer, is into everything from like battles to pendulum, so
right.
he's like his kind of, and then between them, the parts that they write are so kind of hook laden anyway. Like even if you
Mm.
just like listen to the rhythm section of our band, like there's hooks in there that they both write themselves. They're both quite poppy in the way that they write in their respective instruments. So I think that maybe adds to this sort of rich tapestry that we are.
Mm.
But yeah, it's hard to say because it's also bands that are huge to me, for example, are probably not huge to your average indie rock listener. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Like your average indie rock listener probably doesn't know who Swell Maps are, probably doesn't know who Felt are, it probably doesn't know who Hüsker Du are. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And obviously these aren't underground bands; they're all very influential bands, but still, like in the grander scheme of things, they're very, very small bands. So
Yeah.
like Mission of Burma is an absolutely massive one.
Yeah.
I take guitar lessons with Roger Miller from Mission of Burma,
Oh wow. Okay. But yeah,
which
no,
is
Mission of Burma. I didn't think of that before, but that does totally make sense.
yeah, 100%. Well, but with this band, like we originally had two guitar players, myself and someone else.
Mm.
And then after having a couple, I realized that guitar players were far more effort than they're worth. So then we kind of became a three piece. And I got, when I was kind of trying to figure out how this band could, become a three piece but retain in the live context anyway, still the depth and sonic scope of a band with two guitar players. I started listening to a lot of three-piece bands to try
Yeah.
and get my head around how they fill that space. So
Mm.
that's how Mission of Burma came into my life. And obviously, Our Band Could Be Your Life, that book was, a huge influence on anyone that's
That's
read
a
it.
great book.
They have a chapter in there. So, yeah, they're a massive one. And actually doing lessons with Roger has been extremely helpful in some ways, and he likes us, which means I can basically just hang it up now because my job is done. Do you know what I mean? It's like Roger
Yeah.
Miller
That's very
commented,
validating.
yeah. So yeah, definitely.
Now, something that I wanted to ask you, and I don't want to keep you for too long, but going back
I've got it
to
down the world, man. Don't worry, honestly, I want no plans.
cool. Well, going back to what I said earlier about this podcast sort of being an extension of this book that I will say I am going to write because it's good to be, put the certainty out into the universe.
Yeah, you've got to have a goal. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm really interested in exploring sort of the practicalities of bands that are, operating on a DIY level independently. And so, when it's the case of a band like yours, where you have been going for a while, then I think you've got a lot of valuable insight on this topic. So one of the things that I'm particularly interested in getting insight from different bands on is the touring experience. So how actively are you involved with booking shows, and how in general, if you want to go about playing in Glasgow or you want to even play abroad, you want to book a tour, how do you go about all of this?
I mean, the landscape has changed quite a bit in the 10 years since this band kind of started. And back when it used to be a solo project, when I used to do solo shows, there were definitely, it was a lot more about networking then. Like I
Yeah.
would just meet bands at gigs, or like I used to tour as a guitar tech for the band I mentioned earlier, Johnny Foreigner. Like I'd meet bands that they would play with and get chatting to them and give them a CD or something, and then maybe I'd hook up with them on the internet, and then I'd end up playing in a beer garden in Derby with them. In the case of this band, My Psychoanalyst, for example. So back then it was a lot more about just networking and chatting to people, and there seemed to be a lot more people putting on kind of DIY shows. Now I
Mm.
do think that COVID has had a massive impact in that sense. I mean, not only in the venues that we're seeing closed down, but it seems a lot less people are putting on smaller gigs, because obviously the cost of putting gigs on is gotten so much higher, and with the overheads being so high, people can't just willy-nilly start putting on bands. But in terms of booking shows and stuff, I mean, we've always booked our own shows. I actually kind of have my own sort of kind of press agency, which I've only used for this band and I've used for another band I'm in. And I booked shows via that as well. But there's no substitute for experience, really. Like in essence, getting shows isn't hard as long as you're prepared to play them for little to no money. And the most important thing, provided you have the transport, really. That's, I'd say, the biggest obstacle to anyone trying to book shows is getting there with your equipment. Now, if you can afford to get there with the stuff that you need to play, getting shows is actually pretty easy. But the most useful thing anyone in a band can do if they want to get themselves shows around the country or elsewhere is just start getting into what local promoters there are, really, and getting promoters and also trying to give promoters like a reason to put you on. I mean, there's no reason that a promoter in Manchester, unless you've already got a proven following there, which I'm assuming you don't by the virtue of the fact that you were looking for a show in Manchester. Yep. What reason would they have to put on a band from another city? And if the reason is that, well, because we're really good and we think that we'd be a good support for some of these other bands they put on, then make sure they know that, And if, although people are cynical, like if a promoter is putting on shows, that tends to imply that they enjoy music. And if they enjoy your music and you play for them and they like you, chances are they'll probably put you on again, even if you don't bring that many people. And they might try and help you build an audience if they think like, yeah, I like these guys, I'd like to get them on again. We've got a good relationship with a couple of promoters around the country now. Nottingham with like Button Pusher and Sonic Masala, London with Permanent Creeps. Leeds maybe, but like these are all promoters that kind of took a punt on us, and then after seeing us, were like, yeah, we'll have you back, But another thing as well, I'd say is like I've often just booked out the venues myself. And
that was going to be my question. So sometimes you would actually just go directly to venues to So in the case of like the Dreams of Being Cornered tour in 2021, so I used to play in a band called Goddamn, who we did a lot of touring, and through that I met a lot of people and met a lot of people in bands. And so when I knew that Mutes wanted to play in Leeds, I found a venue that didn't charge extortionate prices to hire it out, a place called Hyde Park Book Club. And I asked my friends in Leeds if they wanted to support my band, And for example, I asked a band called Magic Mountain, who's Tom from Pull Apart My Horses band that he has with his wife. They weren't available. They said, we can't do it because Lynn's just had a baby. But ask our other friend's band, Owen. This guy called Owen used to be in a band called Grammatics, and who just recently got a name drop in one of the latest Yard Act singles, apparently. And also used to be in a band called Colour of Fire. And he had a new band, and I asked him if they fancied playing. He was like, yeah, we'll do that. So they did. And we met a band when I was with Goddamn, band called FEMA from, where I think they might be from Liverpool. I can't remember. Anyway, but I met them for playing Goddamn, so I asked them if they wanted to come and play it, and they said yes. And we had a gig, and like obviously it meant like doing the door myself as well. I think Tom did the door actually. But it all worked out fine. So even if a promoter won't put you on, it doesn't mean you can't play a gig there. Just source the venue, do it yourself. It's really not that difficult. I mean, I'm not trying to shit on promoters here, but most promoters, all they fucking do is, X out the room in the calendar, ask a couple of bands to play, create a fucking Facebook event, and that's it. They don't do much in the way of promotion. So if you can do those things yourself, it's fine. Just be prepared to maybe either lose a bit of money or not make any money. But if it's just a gig you're looking to do, it can be done. And as a sort of reference point for people, so they sort of know what's reasonable, what kind of cut would you expect, or like what kind of price would you expect from a promoter?
In terms of our fee?
If
I was putting on a show myself and hiring out a venue, well, I can answer both. In terms, I mean, fees is a bit of a stickler. I mean, we're not a particularly popular band, and we don't bring that many people. So, like, if we play a local gig here, if we support we supported a band called Omni the other week, who, one of my favorite bands, absolutely love them. We got 50 quid. Now, that's fine because the venue is literally 45 seconds from my front door, and it cost us nothing to do that gig. We did a headline show in London the other week, and we got 100 quid. That covered petrol and parking. That was it, because you look obviously you try and sell some merchandise, and try. But then, it's all very different. I mean, I play in another band called Margarita Witch Cult, who are kind of like a doom stoner band, and we're signed. We have a booking agent, so the fees are significantly higher, and in that that scene of music, the doom metal scene, it's another big thing as well. Indie rock fans don't generally wear t-shirts, so they don't sell.
Because I was going to ask about how significant the merch is, so they're not that great for buying t-shirts.
For us, it's almost non-existent. But for Margarita Witch Cult, rock and metal fans, they don't go clothes shopping; they go to gigs, so they sell a shit ton of merch there. We sell. God, with Margarita Witch Cult, we can do 500 quid in merch easily. Some nights.
Wow.
But it's a completely different scene, and I think that's the other thing as well. The point I'd make to any kind of DIY musician is that, I don't want to say temper your expectations because that sounds negative, but there are certain genres of music that have a far, you have a far quicker rise to what could be seen as an exciting level of existence. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The more esoteric sort of genres, stuff that isn't kind of easy to latch onto, it is more difficult to grow a fan base, and there's more niche sort of communities that can be harder to break into. Whereas more sort of easily I don't want to say basic, but I will just say just more kind of basic music, that is easier to latch onto,
easier to classify,
like hard rock, or like stoner, something that there's a pre-made market for. Is far easier to break into because that community is already in place. So it all depends what you're trying to do, really. But then also, it's kind of funny you should ask me that question because that kind of coincides with us deciding not to play live anymore, really, for the first.
Oh, right, okay.
Primarily because of time, and I want to record now. I mean, I'm going to record this next album myself and mix it all myself again. So, we need the time to do that. But just because also financially, it has. I mean, case in point, as I just told you, the fee that we got for that show with Omni a few weeks ago was 50 quid. That's kind of the going rate for a support fee at our local venue. It's been that for about 5 years, so it hasn't adjusted for inflation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just, and if you're not selling lots of merch, it just kind of becomes financially nonsensical to keep doing it, and so I think as well, something that people kind of, it's something that new bands and stuff don't want to accept. And I totally understand why, but it's just you don't have to play as much as you want to because all these things are transactional, aren't they? And promoters want to put you on because you will bring people, and if you're playing all the time, those people are probably not going to come to your next gig. And
kind of oversaturate it.
Exactly, the oversaturation. So sometimes it's best to try and approach things in a bit more of a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? So I'm not very good at thinking of words today. You just have to be a bit brutal with yourself and be like, do people really want to come and see us again so soon?
Yeah.
So, but then on the other hand, it all depends on what you want out of it. Do you want to grow your band? Why do you want to grow your band? If you're starting a band because you want to be in a popular band, I'd argue that's the wrong reasons to be doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And obviously everyone wants to get some kind of return on investment in that sense. You know what I mean? You don't want to be playing to no one forever because it's not very fun. But so if you don't care about that stuff, then play as much as you can. If you just want to do it because you enjoy doing it. But it all depends what your end goal is. Yeah.
And on the recording side of things, so recording, having singles, EPs, albums, whatever, double albums, triple albums. From your experience, like, what would you say at this point people should expect? Like, what are the kind of costs to expect? What kind of investment should people be prepared to put into making a record, whether like record or CD or tape, whatever, and what can people realistically expect to get back from that?
I mean, again, it goes back to how the landscape has shifted, in that we are living in a very single-centric culture at the moment, and you'll see bands are now putting out EPs rather than albums, and the algorithm dictates that if you feed into it a consistent level of output, it will love you back, a bit more. So that's why nowadays you do see bands that are being sensible about it and trying to sort of, rather than play against the system, play with the system, just putting out singles, every month or 2 months, because things like Spotify actually does kind of reward you if you use its services consistently, because it's you using those services that engages listeners, that gets it money, blah, blah, blah. Whatever happens, the artist gets fuck all, but that's a point that's been labored over. We don't need to go over that. But it's, in terms of what can it cost when you set out to do it, again, it all goes back to what kind of approach you want to take. I mean, if you want to go into a studio with someone, well, you're looking at, any studio worth going into, and if you're going in with someone who knows what they're doing, you're kind of looking at £250 a day, which, if you can get a record done in 2 days like us, is fantastic. Most people can't, and that's not because we're any better or because they're any worse. It's just the nature of what you're trying to do. Yeah, if you're looking to just go in and just bang out some songs live and just do one take vocal, you probably can do that. But it depends. If you can do a hybrid approach like we do, in which case you can do some stuff yourself at home and some in a studio, that's best of both worlds, But like the first EP I ever did, I did on a bloody cheap 2-input Focusrite interface. All I had was an SM57 and a terrible MIDI keyboard that I'm looking at right now. It's so old that it won't work with this computer because the firmware no longer exists. So, that cost me a grand total of 180 quid, which is kind of all the money I had in the world at that time. Whereas this album that hopefully we'll start recording, Jesus Christ, I've probably spent about $3,000 in the past 8 months buying equipment to use, with a new interface, a nice pair of matched condensers and, all this stuff, and a headphone amplifier and stuff like that.
Now, let me just interject, and sorry to interrupt your thought, and just you're making me think of a sort of subsidiary question. With all that money that you're investing, is that money that you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to get this back? Or that's money that you are basically, it's like you're investing in creating this thing, which is then going to be the reward of itself?
The latter entirely. It's never been about making the money back. Not from this band. I think you can kind of, there's, like, for example, the other band I'm in, for example, Margarita Witch Cult, because we're more popular and we tour a lot more and we've got a label and all this stuff, and it costs a lot more to do it as a result, because, like when we go to Europe in a couple of weeks, we've got to hire a driver and a van to take us around for 13 days, and that costs €150 a day. So you have to be thinking about, well, how are we going to make this back? Because we literally need to pay for this to happen, Whereas when you're a band like Mutes are, that have never made a penny ever from anything, well, you can't be thinking about that, because then you just never do it. Do you know what I mean? That's not, as you just alluded to, like the very making of something is the reward, For me, like, obviously it's in my interest to do it because it's what I'm passionate about, and it's also, you build skills for doing it, like I've recorded other bands before, I have now this skill that I can use if not for my own music, then to maybe help someone else bring theirs into the world, So it's an investment in yourself as well. And that's one thing I would say as well, is like a bit of, a golden nugget of advice or whatever. But like, these things you do, even if the end product, even in the case of like making a song, like even if the end product isn't something that you're necessarily proud of, don't discount the work that went into doing it, because you may well apply that to something more successful in the future. You know, but again, my advice to these sort of DIY, anyone that wants to be in a DIY band. I mean, most bands are DIY now by default because the infrastructure is no longer there to support artists, really. But try and do as much stuff you can yourself, because there is an authenticity to that, and that's something that in an age where there's again, I know this is not particularly insightful, but in an age of sort of instant gratification and things like that, like to actually labor over something and learn a craft and try and perfect your craft and make mistakes and do all this stuff. Like, I think people do genuinely hear it in the end product. Do you know what I mean? People can hear that something isn't just run of the mill kind of cookie cutter, kind of stuff. And I think we need that. And it's although I just said all the infrastructure isn't there for artists anymore, on the flip side of that, like, it's never been easier to make music yourself. So many devices at our disposal. It's if you have an idea, there are steps that you can take to bring it into reality, and that's really what all this stuff is about: is bringing an idea into reality, whether that be an idea of being a band on stage, or an idea of a song, or of an idea that you have something within you that you feel can create something that might provoke a feeling in someone else, or even just validate your own feelings when you hear it back. It's worth pursuing, because we do so much digesting as a culture, and we live in a culture where, I mean, even like today, like, I fucking hate my job. Lots of people hate their job. My job leaves me with very little energy sometimes to do anything creative after, and I hate that. I hate the fact that I feel like it's a leech that is drawing the life out of me. So sometimes you need to fight against that. Be like, no, fuck it. I am going to sit down and do something musical this evening. I'm not just going to fucking rot on the settee. And you always feel better after it. It's like going to the gym. It's the gym of the mind.
Yeah, you don't necessarily feel like you want to do it, but once you've done it, you're happy that you did.
100%. Yeah.
Now, I've got a philosophical question for you, James, which I like to ask my guests. Why do you make music?
Because for some reason, I feel like if I don't, I will just wither away and die. I don't know. That's obviously being facetious or overly dramatic for purpose of humor, but no, I just think it's something that and I'm sure anyone who has this compulsion to do it will say the same, but like, it's just like this nagging feeling that you can't get rid of, that you need to be doing this thing. It becomes a sort of almost an internal mission. Do you know what I mean? There's no, it's unquenchable, I think. But I suppose if I had to distill that answer into one sentence, it would be because it gives my life purpose.
Yep, I can totally relate to that. And
it's pretty annoying sometimes, because it's like, probably far happier if you didn't feel this dissatisfaction with everything else. But it is what it is.
Maybe if you found God, then you wouldn't need it.
Well, as you can tell from the lyrics, I've been trying.
Yeah, man's eternal search for meaning.
Precisely.
So wrapping things up with a couple of questions. So first of all, so this is it, right? There's going to be no more live shows. You're not going to come to Glasgow to play.
Oh no, there will be more live shows at some point, just not for the foreseeable whilst life events happen. We'd love to play in Glasgow, but again, because we are where we are in Birmingham, it would necessitate really having to get another couple of shows up north to make it again financially feasible to go out there. But no, I'd absolutely love to play Glasgow. There's lots of brilliant. I was actually friends with a band called Pinact from Glasgow. Don't you remember them? Sort of indie band. Pause as well. I think they're from Glasgow. No,
Glasgow reference points won't be great for me because I have been away for so long.
Oh yeah, no, that's fine. But yeah, no, Glasgow's great, and there's a lot of good bands that have come from Glasgow. We would love to play there someday. But and hey, if you know anyone that would put us on, doesn't hurt to put us in touch, you know.
All right, duly noted. Yeah. But so on that point, let's say in terms of, you know, making decisions down the line to play shows, or in general, you know, news about upcoming releases, what is generally the best place for people to follow the band and kind of keep track of what you're doing?
Just Instagram, I say that seems to be where everything happens now. I mean, I've just had a bit of a social media kind of cull really with us. Kind of I've archived all our posts and stuff, and just because I don't know, it's sometimes maybe again going back to the whole worried about us being too poppy thing. I also don't like it when people overexpose themselves on social media. I think it takes away from the essence of what the art is, you know. But yeah, just Instagram, Facebook, just a typical, like, just send me a message on Instagram saying, what are you doing? And I will, you know.
That's good to know. And so thinking about Buried Where You Stand in general and people listening to it, obviously it's on Spotify, I guess, the various other streaming platforms, so people can listen to that. But of course, it's very nice when people support bands by actually buying the music. So if people felt inclined to buy the album,
yeah, they can do
the best way for them to do that.
They can do so on Bandcamp, and we have a night. In fact, this would be interesting to actually show you in person. Sorry, 1 second. We have very nice. So this is my actual lyric book. Your moleskin, hideously stained by coffee and beer and stuff. And this is the reproduction booklet that comes with the album.
Oh, nice.
All the original scans of the lyrics. Obviously, you know, a lot of lyrics that weren't used because it's literally just the original scans. And my handwriting is utterly terrible, so you can't read half them anyway. But
again, that's really cool. I like that. It's very kind of like personalized.
Yeah, well, again, this is kind of part of the. I keep saying part of the joke, but like it's personal until you realize that you can't fucking read half of it, and then it's all of a sudden quite ambiguous again. Do you know what I mean? So, but yeah, if you buy it on Bandcamp, you can buy it with the booklet and the CD, and obviously it's greatly appreciated because it kind of helps us just, you know, pay for microphone stands and other stuff that we need to record with.
Yeah. So. And also, you know, when some way down the line, these companies just implode and cease to exist for whatever reason, it's nice to actually have the music.
Yeah, precisely. And it is, you know, it is, I think anyone who is in a DIY position in the band will agree with, like, you kind of, you get what you give, you know. I mean, I always try and buy bands merchandise if I see smaller bands. Yep. You know, I've got enough band t-shirts to clothe a small country. Do you know what I mean? Half of them I don't wear, but I'll still buy them because, you know, I buy records. I don't own a record player, but I'll buy them because I know that it will help the band. And, you know, it's like anything. Like, if you enjoy something, you know, not everything is some sort of horrible capitalistic enterprise. Like, there are some things you can buy into that are a worthy cause. And, you know, if you see a band and you like them, buy into them.
I 100% agree. Very, very incidental question just to finish off. I think I know what your last name is, but I notice on Bandcamp you just put yourself down as James.
Yes.
Would you like to just be James?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the aside from name, my similarities with the Godfather of Soul in there. You know, but I think that answers the question.
Totally fine. I was just curious.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Again, that's a bit of a nod to there's a fantastic legendary band from Birmingham called Felt, and their singer went anonymously as just Lawrence. So that's sort of
that's a cool reference point. I like that. That's good. Nice. Well, James, thank you very much for your time. It was really cool to talk to you.
And yourself. It's been a lovely conversation.
And my pleasure. And yeah, Buried Where You Stand is the album. It's out now, as we just discussed. People can go and listen to it in the usual places. And if they would like to support a DIY band that's doing good things, they now know how to do so if they didn't know before.
Wonderful. And it will be appreciated. And if not, thanks for even thinking about it, you know?
Excellent. James, thank you very much.